Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. And today we're going to continue our coverage with the ongoing situation between Ukraine, the West, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the Russian Federation. So, obviously, the buildup of Russian forces continue in the region. There continues to be very heated rhetoric being exchanged by the two sides. In addition, we've also received information in terms of what the Russians are asking for in terms of quite possibly avoiding a conflict, an invasion of Ukraine, and quite possibly other states as well. So, what exactly are the Russians asking for, and is it reasonable? Is it something that the West should even entertain? And I wanted to have a focused and analytical discussion about that issue, and to see if this ask from the Russian Federation is unreasonable, and quite possibly could the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the United States, accept said request from Russia. So first, the Russians are asking for more or less a veto on whether Ukraine is able to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization or not. And again, that is a red line by the Russians, and in all likelihood, we would see some form of military conflict if we actively see the Ukrainians join NATO, and we see NATO forces, more importantly, start to be positioned within Ukraine. So again, I think that is the tripwire, and ultimately that is going to be a no in terms of a make it or break it deal. I don't foresee Ukraine being accepted into NATO. Is it possible? Yes, absolutely it is. But again, to avert conflict, to avert military conflict, would it be prudent for Ukraine to join NATO? And at this point, definitely, probably not. And I think the West needs to look long term as well. Is Putin always going to be in a position of power? He's old. I think he's close to 70 years old now. So eventually, there's going to be another leader in the Russian Federation. So what is happening now may not be indicative of what happens in the future. So you have to really focus on that as well. The next ask from Russia is the removal of NATO combat battalions from Poland and the Baltic state. So let's first look at Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So from a military perspective, okay, from a military outlook, does it benefit NATO by having combat battalions operating inside of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, outside of simply being used as training units to better increase the combat capacity and training of the Estonian, Latvian, and Lithuanian militaries? Outside of training the militaries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, there is not much those small combat battalions can do other than show the flag, show support that Latvia, and Estonia has NATO support in the event of armed conflict. Okay, but the idea that these combat battalions could actually do something in terms of preventing a Russian invasion, and I would say actually they would be more of an hindrance, because very quickly these units, these battalion-sized elements that operate, let's say in Estonia, would be enveloped and probably destroyed in zone, if not captured. And again, you're probably looking at then 500 prisoners of war that the Russian Federation now has very quickly on the onset of a conflict. So it probably is not benefiting NATO from a strategic outlook in terms of it being able to defend the Baltics. Obviously, these units are much, much too small in order to prevent a Russian invasion of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So the outcome is going to be the same either way. If these forces withdraw, then does it alleviate Putin's anxiety about these forces, and especially the public opinion of the Russians in terms of NATO deployments to the former Soviet states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So I would say withdrawing those forces, withdrawing those combat battalions, would not be a real game changer in terms of NATO's overall strategic outlook. If there was a move into Estonia, into Latvia, into Lithuania by the Russian army, again, these battalions are not going to be able to do much to stop it. So again, you're going to be at the same, you're going to be in the same predicament whether you have them there or not, right? So if you're able to do that, withdraw those battalions and possibly alleviate that anxiety from Russia, which is it a legitimate concern? Possibly. Again, there were statements made before NATO expansion that would indicate that NATO had no interest into expanding into the Baltics, expanding into Poland, expanding into other areas, but they did, and that is what has the Russians concerned. So again, if we see those forces pull out or stay, again, a Russian invasion of the Baltic states is going to have the same outcome. The Russians are initially going to have a strategic victory in the Baltics and seize control of the Baltics with those NATO deployments or not. Now, granted, it may give the Baltics a day or two extra time, possibly. But again, those forces are going to be engaged and defeated very, very quickly by a much larger mechanized force that would be launching an invasion of the Baltic states. So the next is Poland. The idea that they would withdraw those combat battalions from Poland. Now this becomes a little bit more tricky. Now, obviously, the idea that Russia could prepare and then launch an invasion into Poland at this point in time without a fairly significant buildup of forces would be something that I would say is simply not going to occur in the foreseeable future. Again, you would probably be looking at a fairly sizable buildup of Russian forces, an expansion of the Russian armed forces in its entirety in order to facilitate an actual invasion of Poland. So again, whether those combat battalion is present in Poland or not, the Polish armed forces are very capable, and obviously, as a longer standing member of NATO that actually borders Germany, the Czech Republic, and other NATO states as well. Obviously, NATO is not going to allow a Russian invasion of Poland, and in all likelihood, you would see the onset of World War III with an invasion of Poland. I think you just would. Now, I again, the idea that the Russians would invade Poland is really kind of nonsensical at this point. And I think Poland knows that. I think Germany knows that. I think NATO knows that the Russians are not going to invade Poland, with or without the NATO battalion present. So again, you withdraw that NATO battalion, and hypothetically, the Russians do decide to invade Poland. That one NATO battalion is probably not going to mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, you're going to see you're going to see an attempted reforger by the United States. You'll see United States start to move heavy ground forces, and you'll see the outbreak of World War III, quite frankly. So it really doesn't mean anything. Again, you could withdraw that combat battalion, and the Polish border could be the red line for NATO. Obviously, it would be. And again, it wouldn't really change what's actually happening on the ground. It would in terms of Obviously, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Again, the Russians could seize the Baltic states with very little issue, with or without the NATO battalion present. So again, NATO probably made a strategic error, a miscalculation by accepting Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania into NATO, knowing that it could not accurately, um, uh, adequately defend the Baltics from a possible Russian invasion. But the withdrawal of NATO forces from Poland, again, if that were to occur, we're looking at World War III. We just are, and I don't think the Russians are even willing to accept that. So again, I think the reality of the situation is if you withdraw that combat battalion from Poland or future combat battalions from Poland, you're not going to see a Russian invasion of Poland. Okay? In terms of the Baltics, if you withdraw the combat battalions from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or whatever rotation that currently exists, again, it's not going to really make a hill of beans whether they're there or they're not there. The outcome is going to be the same. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are going to be lost. And then the question is then, is Poland, Germany, and the other NATO states willing to go into World War III over the Baltic states? And I would say most of NATO is not going to be willing to do that. I would say there's more likelihood of a NATO response for an invasion of Poland versus the Baltics. Again, the strategic situation is much more dire in the Baltics than it would be in Poland. Poland is defendable. The Baltics are simply not. As for Ukraine, again, same thing. The Russians will ultimately attempt, quite possibly, to invade Ukraine if there is a NATO expansion into Ukraine, and that will be their response. But beyond that, again, we really don't see the Russians going beyond Ukraine, going beyond the Baltic states. And at some point, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is just going to have to accept that status quo or face the prospect of a very, very significant conflict in Western Europe. That's all I have. We're going to continue to cover the situation and report with more to come soon. Have a good day, everybody.